My name is Jan Harzan. I'm the executive director for Mufon. We are a scientific research organization that basically collects sighting reports from the public and then goes and investigates them. Our mission statement as an organization is the scientific study of UFOs for the benefit of humanity, and we have three primary goals. We investigate UFO reports, we promote research into the UFO subject, and we educate the public on our findings. Mufon is really more just left of center, where we try to take a scientific approach by collecting the data first off, and then reviewing the data, investigating the data, and making sure that what we're seeing is actually something that's truly an unknown. We have 3,000 members worldwide. Many scientists, physicists, PhDs, metallurgists, biologists, all the way down to just the average citizen who really wants to get involved. Some of those have chosen to become field investigators, and they go through our field investigative training courses. They become part of the team in their state or country where they reside, and they actually get engaged in going out and meeting this phenomena head on. We receive about 500 to 1,000 reports per month from around the world. Field investigators will take the case, generally review it, try to come up with a hypothesis, checking star charts, and we'll go put an investigation in place to determine what exactly happened. We've recently formed a science review board, and that board is made up of scientists from around the United States and around the world to review some of our more significant cases and try to render an opinion on them. What we'd like to do is be more outbound, more outspoken in terms of the really true UFO cases. So Mufon is moving forward with this approach, and we'll be publishing papers in these different areas to allow the general public and even the scientific community to be able to be challenged by what we're finding. That's the strength of Mufon as an organization, is being really the truth seekers of the UFO field.
Good morning. To kick off this morning's event, our first speaker is Aaron Judkins. He's an author, explorer, and archaeologist. He has a passion for searching for the truth about the mysteries of the past, exposing forbidden archaeology and forbidden history. He's also a producer, known for the 2014 film Finding Noah and Hidden Mountain, the Los Lunas Mystery Stone. He has appeared in Footprints in Stone, Forbidden History, Volume 2 in 2013, and Watchers 8 in 2014. He is credited with mapping the longest contiguous dinosaur trackway in the Western Hemisphere and discovering a new trail of dinosaur tracks, and they are nicknamed the Judkins Trail. Let me welcome to the stage Mr. Aaron Judkins.
Good morning. We're going to get started. The topic is the return of the NEPHILIM. How many know what the NEPHILIM are? Okay. I hope you learned something new, because this is going to be a very fascinating topic, and my goal is that you would walk away either learning something new or having your presuppositions challenged a little bit. I know mine were when I was writing this book. I had some sacred cows that was slaughtered, and it's okay. I came to terms with it. But you know, there's some truth to these things, and I want to be able to share these things with you. This is my website. You can go there, follow me on everything that I do. Let's get to it. Fallen angels, the return of the NEPHILIM. Yes, we're talking about the fallen angels because they have something to do with this topic. Who are the sons of God? Where did the giants come from? When did they live? And what was the reason for the flood? We're going to start off with our target passage here, and this goes back to ancient historical writings, the guidebook to the supernatural, if you will. And most of this will be referenced from Genesis 6, because after all, this is where the original term NEPHILIM came from. And it came to pass when the men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and the daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair. And they took them wives, all of which they chose. That's the Genesis 6 passage. The sons of God. They are, in Hebrew, the B'nai Ha-Elohim. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came among them. I'm laying a foundation here for you so you can understand where the Nephilim came from. We see that the sons of God came, and that there was a day when the sons of God, notice the sons of God, again reference, came and presented themselves. And when the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. This is the B'nai Ha-Elohim. So how did the fallen angels get here? The fallen angels, as you guessed, are the reference to the sons of God in the Old Testament. How did they get here? There is a very fascinating book. It's not canonized, but it's called the Book of Enoch. How many heard of it? The Book of Enoch. In the Book of Enoch, it's almost like if you could, it's like reading a C.S. Lewis novel, or a Lord of the Rings movie, because when you start looking into this is some pretty wild stuff. It really is. And although we can't say with a surety that everything in there happened in history, we can't say that everything in there is true. It may give us some insight, though, into the past. If we could peer into the past a little bit, the Book of Enoch does that for us. And it says that Mount Hermon in Lebanon is the place where 200 Watcher-class angels made their entry on this planet. Now, most of y'all don't know this probably, but Hermon means the forbidden gate. See, Mount Hermon was the gateway to the gods. Mount Hermon was the gateway that they used to enter this planet. And we also have in history, Jerome, the early church father who translated the Bible into Latin, said that Mount Hermon, or Hermon, means anathema. What does that mean, anathema? Does anyone know? It means forbidden or restricted, right? But not just forbidden or restricted. It's almost as if it is a place that's restricted or forbidden because it is evil. That's the specific term that's used here, anathema, Mount Hermon. It's not just restricted or forbidden. It's forbidden because it's evil. There's an evil presence to it. Something happened back then that Jerome is saying that they used the term anathema when they talked about Mount Hermon. Their purpose was to induce the seed of the serpent into the human race. We're going to talk about this. This is Mount Hermon. Everybody see okay? This is Mount Hermon here. And you've probably heard about Mount Hermon. This is where the tribe of Dan moved into the area. Now, the tribe of Dan was one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and they were the first to break away and go and do their own thing up in the north. I've been to the tribe of Dan where we found where their place was. It's called Tal.E, and they had built a huge altar there. And the gates and the walls, everything's still there. It's the walls are remarkably intact. I've been there twice. It's right near Lebanon, and it's pretty wild. They adopted the worship of the fallen angels, which was Baal worship. So they adopted the Canaanite deities and Ashtaroth from Mount Hermon. We're going to look at, because Baalback, I'm sure you've heard a lot about this term, was a temple discovered honoring Baal in the city that was at the foot of Mount Hermon. This was considered the chief high place in that area. So we know from the stones of Baalback in Lebanon that this is probably one of the great ancient mysteries of the past. You see how they have these huge foundation stones. Some of them are so huge you can't even move them with a crane today. So how did they do this? This is the foundation is still there. Matter of fact, when the Romans came in, the foundation for Baalbek, it was there, and they were so amazed. They marveled at the engineering of Baalbek because they had no clue how that was done. That's how awesome this is, because we're not talking just a little city with stones. That's what Tel Dan was. They just stacked stones. You know, as great as the feat that is, I mean, it's a huge place. I mean, this is awesome. But this is at the foot of Mount Hermon, the place of anathema. We're going to talk about the giants before the flood. And it says that man would be, you know, not living long. It would be only 120 years. But we know back in the Old Testament that at some time there was a long lifespan. The NEPHILIM, there were giants in the earth in those days and also after that. This is the Genesis 6 passage that we're looking at, because this is where they came down on Mount Hermon from. The NEPHILIM. The NEPHILIM is referenced in the book of Enoch here, and they came to pass when the children had multiplied in those days. And again, we see that this is a convergence of evidence, if you will, that they came, the children of heaven, and then they came and they beget children. So this is a strange thing to read, because most people don't understand that fallen angels can take human form. Have you ever heard the term, we entertain angels unaware? Have you ever heard that term? How many have heard that sometimes, for instance, there was a story I heard that this elderly lady, she was driving at night on the road, and she had a flat tire, and she couldn't change the tire, and she needed help, and she didn't have a cell phone, and it was at night, and she was, by herself, and she didn't know what to do. And a car came up behind her suddenly with lights, and a gentleman came out about in his 30s, and he said, "Ma'am, do you need some help?" And she said, "Yes, I do. I have a flat tire." And he said, "Well, let me change it for you." That's all he said. He reached down, changed the tire. She said, "Thank you." She went to turn around to get in the car to leave. She turned around, and the man and the car was gone, disappeared. She said, "I don't know who that was, but someone helped me." We entertain angels unaware. There's multiple stories about angels taking human form. They don't have wings, not when they take human form. There's several types of classes of angels. We're not going to get into all that, but I want you to know there's a difference between like angels of Michael and Gabriel and the fallen angels. So we're talking about the fallen angels because these guys left their first estate. What does that mean? They had one estate of existence. See, we live in a terrestrial plane, don't we? We live in 4 dimensions. What are those 4 dimensions? Anybody? Length, height, width. What's the 4th one? Time. Very, very good. Time. So, but we understand that all those are finite. Time is finite. Scientists have slowed the speed of light down to 35 miles per hour. Can you believe that? 35 miles per hour. What's the speed of light? 186,282 miles per second, somewhere in there. But the speed of light can be slowed down. So what happens if you alter the speed of light? What? Yes, sir. It changes time. So what happens if you send 2 astronauts to Mars, packing for Mars, right? What happens if you send those guys out? What happens on Earth in relation to time? Right? What happens? The time on Earth is faster, isn't it? Right? Because the 2 astronauts, when they come back, they're not going to have aged. Everybody on the planet that they ever knew would probably have died. Now, we're talking deep time, maybe even past Mars. It takes a lot of distance just to get to our nearest star, Alpha Centauri, like 4.5 light years away. Now, what's a light year? 4.5 light years away. 4.5 light years doesn't sound far until you know that you have to travel at the speed of light at 186,000 miles per second. I think I said, what did I say a while ago? It's 186,000 miles per second. That's how fast it is. But you have to travel that fast for that long just to reach our nearest star. That's pretty far. That's vast, isn't it? And we're not even talking about deep time yet. We're not even talking about the next galaxy. We're not even talking about another solar system. We're talking about just getting to our nearest star. All right. All right, the Grecians called them giants. What did the Greeks also call them? The Titans. That's where we get the Greek Titans from. Apollo and all those guys. And you're right. In Greek mythology, the Titans were powerful beings who were the offspring. And these guys went down through mythology and legends of old, and they were the Titans. And it says they were eventually overthrown and imprisoned in Tartarus, the depths of the underworld. There's a lot of stories with the Titans we won't get into, but just know that throughout history, there's been giants, those NEPHILIM. Now, the NEPHILIM are not the fallen angels, by the way. The NEPHILIM are the offspring of the fallen angels. That's kind of a weird thing, isn't it? How does that happen? Because when they left their first estate, they could not go back. They had to be in human form until they physically died. They couldn't go back. Once they left and went in, that was it. And if you ever read the book of Enoch, it says that they knew they had messed up. Those 200 class watcher angels, there was one leader of them. And he was the one that kind of got them all together, and it names those guys. And it names what they were doing and why they got in trouble. And they understood that, wow, there's, we're in a big problem here. This is a big problem. And they asked Enoch to go before the Lord on their behalf because they knew they were doomed. So Enoch goes before the Lord and sees, if there's any hope for these guys, and there's not. These guys had to live out a physicality. They died, but at some point, these guys came back. When those guys died, their spirits became disembodied spirits. So this gets into some realm of eschatology and theology and et cetera, but this happens because we see it happening today. I'm going to make that tie for you. And the spirits in prison, which sometimes were disobedient in the days of Noah. So we understand that these things were happening back then, and this is nothing new. Nothing new is under the sun, right? Have you ever heard that? And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, it says in Jude, they were reserved everlasting change into the darkness. Something happened back then that they were not supposed to do, but they did it anyway. You tell your kid, don't do that, and they do it, right? Don't touch that hot stove. They go touch it. There's a choice that they had, in other words. They had a free will to choose. So, in Jude again, it says, the raging waves of the sea foaming at their shame and wandering stars. The stars are the reference to the angels, by the way, when you're reading it here. To whom is reserved blackness of darkness forever. And Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, behold, the Lord comes with thousands of his saints. This is showing that there was a war in heaven, and these fallen angels, which left their first estate, came down here to Mount Hermon, right, the place of anathema. And the angels were cast out with him. What am I talking about? I like to term it from a colleague of mine who I think put it very well, L.A. Marzulli. You probably heard of him. L.A. is a good friend of mine. He calls it the cosmic chess match. And that's what it really is going on here, cosmic chess match. When we talk about the flood, the flood came and destroyed the earth, not because of anything that necessarily that let me put it another way. When those fallen angels came in, they really began to interfere in the events and the affairs of mankind. And that's caused the problem, because what were they doing? They were blending their seed with the seed of man. This is strange stuff. And then they produced a race of giants called the NEPHILIM. But it says Noah was perfect in his generations. What does that mean? Noah wasn't perfect. It means that Noah was not polluted with a corrupt DNA or gene pool. Noah was about the only one in those days of the NEPHILIM that could be saved. The earth was corrupt and all flesh had corrupted. We know that the fallen angels came in and just really started messing things up. Also, if you read the book of Jasher, the book of Jubilees, all this will give you insights in addition to the book of Enoch. It's really mysterious. It's some strange stuff in there. But if you want to learn about the past, I'm not saying this is all truth. I'm saying it possibly can give you insight into what happened back in those days. And it certainly, the convergence of evidence matches with what we know in history, the Titans, archaeology, etc. So we just talked about the giants before the flood. Now let's talk about the giants after the flood, because remember the flood came and supposedly wiped everything out, right? Except for the people on the ark, right? Who's going to go see Finding Noah, by the way? 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Finding Noah. Do y'all know about Finding Noah? You should. October 8th, this is a documentary film that chronicles our journey up Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey. And it's going to be a limited theatrical release October 8th. So it's a Thursday night. If you miss it on October 8th, it's it. You have to wait for it to come out on DVD. So, but it is a true documentary. It's directed by Brent Baum, produced by Matthew Marsden, narrated by Gary Sinise. So this is a very professional film. Giants after the flood. Numbers 13:33 and Genesis 6:4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. After what? After that flood. So we know that these guys came back. So let's look at a timeline here. So this is kind of showing you a little bit about where this falls in the timeline. This is the giants after the flood. We'll move on. And then it starts giving the names and the races of these giants. In the 14th year came Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him and smote the Rephaims in Ashtaroth, Canarim, and the Zuzumans in Ham, and the Emims in Shevav Kerathaim, and the Horites in Mount Seir. And then it gives the meaning of the names. The Rephaim, the invigorated ones, Emims, the terrors, Horims, the cave dwellers, the Zums, wild creatures. This is pretty strange stuff, because we know that these guys were races of giants, and that when Israel went into Canaan, there were what? Giants in the land. This is where we start getting into the story of David and Goliath. We all know the story of David and Goliath. Did that story actually happen? Who was Goliath? Goliath was from Gath, and Goliath was from a race of giants called the Anakims. That should sound familiar to you, right? The Anakims, the children of Anak were there. In Hebron, they built 7 years before Zoan was in Egypt, and the children of Anak were there. And they were in these walled cities. And they were like, the Israelites said they were like grasshoppers in their sights. Some scholars want to say that they were intellectual giants, right? They weren't smart enough to get in there. Some people say they weren't giants at all. But it's very clear that these guys were Nephilim, the sons of Anak were there. That they were like grasshoppers in their sight. These guys had physical traits that we don't have. They had 6 fingers and 6 toes. They had double rows of teeth. How many have heard about the red-haired giants? A little bit. The red-haired giants, Lovelock Cave, the Paiute Indians in Winnemucca, Nevada. And they found giant skulls in that cave that were still there. And on the Trail of the Nephilim, Volume 1, I write a chapter in Chapter 9 about that. One of my friends actually got in there, and one of the ladies was in there, and he got to photograph those skulls. That's in the book. They found 2 pestles. You know what a pestle is? A pestle's a stone tool that's used for grinding by the Native Americans. They would grind on the, they would either take a mano and a metate, right? And they would grind corn or mesquite beans or whatever. But the pestles, it was a long cylinder rock, stone tool, and they would use it to chop corn or whatever. They found 2 pestles at the mouth of Lovelock Cave. One weighed 25 pounds and the other weighed 40. Can you see a little Native American woman trying to use a... No. These were giants, and these giants used these tools. So we see that there were giants after that. The Imims dwelled there as well, and they were as tall as the Anakims, which were also accounted giants as the Anakims, but the Moabites called them Imims. So we know that these guys were there. Goliath had 4 brothers. Did you know that? Goliath had 4 brothers. How do we know that? Well, it tells us if you read that back there in Numbers, right? He had 4 brothers. So let's talk about David real quick. David's a little shepherd boy. He goes out to fight Goliath. He's taunting him, right? And Goliath goes to put on the king's armor, and he can't wear it. He's too small. He can't move in it. He goes, I've been a shepherd. I fought off all kinds of things on my sheep. He said, just let me go out there. He picks up how many rocks? He picks up 5. 1 for Goliath and 4 for his brothers. So if his brothers jumped in, he was ready, right? That's why he picked up 5. We're talking about the land of the giants. If you hear my radio show that I do every now and then, I say from the Valley of the Giants, because I do live in the Valley of the Giants. Not the Nephilim, but the giants, the big dinosaurs of Dinosaur Valley State Park. The Valley of the Giants, it's also known. These guys were a lot bigger than we are. Not just an abnormal growth of the anterior pituitary gland, right? Acromegaly. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about characteristics that are not human. And these guys were pretty big. King Og was some say between 12 and 15. I think he was roughly about 15 foot tall, depending on your definition of the cubit. And the cubit really changes throughout history. We know that a standard cubit after the flood was probably 18 inches. We do know that. A royal cubit, depending on the ruling monarch or pharaoh or king, varied. Typically an average of about 21 inches. But if he didn't have a firstborn son, which would be the length of his son, would be the royal cubit, or from his elbow to his finger would be a royal cubit. So those changed throughout time, but some point after, the standard cubit really began to take hold, and that was a cubit of 18 inches. So we see that these guys could get very, very tall, and we see these giants in the land of Canaan. So this is what we're talking about. King Og, it gives his length of his bedstead. And although it doesn't give the length of him per se, if you take his bed that it gives, and then you give a little bit more for head and feet room, we estimate King Og's height that way. So this is some pretty wild stuff. Here's King Og, by the way. His bedstead was a bedstead of iron, 9 cubits, and 4 cubits was the width. So we can get a really good idea. And Goliath, he went out a champion whose height was 6 cubits in a span. So you take, this and you can figure out the numbers on this. These are just estimates because we don't know for sure. Here's King Og at 15 foot tall. Goliath, I think Goliath was probably a little taller than this. He was probably a little taller. I think these numbers are just, our best guesstimate. But it gives you a very good idea of where we're at on this scale. You see how small we are. When I went to climb Mount Ararat, I didn't see the summit for about 4 days, right? Because it's socked in by weather. And about the 4th day or so, we had the clear skies, and we were getting ready to make the climb to the mountain, and I saw that summit for the first time, and my heart sank because I realized I'm going to have to climb this thing, and I realized how small I was on this grand mountain. Yeah, I had the same feeling when I was next to the pyramids in Egypt. When you're standing next to it and you realize how small you are, it's really humbling. What do we find in archaeology about giants? We find throughout history there is some archaeological evidence. The convergence of evidence is there. And one of these is a little ostracon, or pottery shard. It has an archaic inscription going back to the 10th century BC, contains 2 non-Semitic names, and one of that is named Goliath. This was found actually in the area of Gath. So if there's a name Goliath on a pottery shard, you don't have to say which one, right? Everybody knows who that is, right? There was another one too that was found. It was on a larger piece of ostracon pottery, and I think it's called the 2 Gates inscription. You can look it up. But this is also the reference of the name Goliath on there. So we understand that Goliath's name has been found already on 2 independent dig sites in Israel in the area of Gath, where he was from. The ancient chimeras. We talked about the Titans in history and how all this is coming down, and that the mixture could have also produced chimeras. Why? Because if you read some of those other books I was telling you about, you understand that they just didn't mate with people. Right? These guys were all over the place. Right? So we have these unicorns and mermaids, and we have these the griffins, and we have all these strange things throughout history of a blend of animals and humans. It's very strange indeed. Did you know that science now is looking at modern chimeras? And if anyone has any more information on this, I'd be glad to get it. But according to the UK labs, 150 human-animal hybrids and embryos have been going secretly in July of 2011 for about 3 years. And they've been working on modern-day chimeras. Wonder why they would do that. Bringing back the NEPHILIM, transgenics, cybergenics. If anyone can vet that photo, I'm all open to it, because I don't know. But I do know that, sorry?
Ceramic art piece.
Ceramic art piece. You know that there are scientists and labs that are working on these chimeras. What about these? Could it be possible? I don't know. Was it possible that those guys existed in the past? Yes. Why do I say that? Because we see evidence for them in archaeology and in history. We do know that the lab is now using mice and things to grow cartilage. They can insert cartilage, and here they got this little guy growing a human ear. So we know that some weird things are possible, and they're even, South Korean scientists are even creating glowing cats. How many have heard about the spider milk? The spider milk, that they're blending some kind of a spider silk with with the goats. So when the goats produce milk, it's a spider milk. So it produces some kind of I think they use it in steel production or something. They blend it in. It's super strong stuff, but they use it. And so instead of waiting on the little spiders to do it, they blend it in with the goats, and it produces in the milk. It's called spider milk. Kind of strange. This is a pretty famous picture of Genghis from the land of Genghis Khan in National Geographic. This photo, I think, was pretty much made famous by Steve Quayle in his book. 7 foot 5 inches, 1922. That's pretty big, isn't it? 7 foot 5, but not as big as those other guys that we just saw. This is Robert Wadlow. He was, at that time, the tallest human ever known. In his time, he was 8 feet 11 inches tall, and he was only 22. So now, Robert suffered from acromegaly. He was not a Nephilim, all right? But I'm just showing you the comparison of how tall people can get. And most people who suffer from acromegaly, Andre the Giant did. And they basically die at an early age because they die of cardiomyopathy or congestive heart failure, and they have poor health problems and they die at an early age. But this is within the realm of possibilities. And this is, matter of fact, I've seen his coat, and we have it at one of the museums. What about super soldiers? You think if they could create a super soldier, they would? Why would they do that? You want to win battles, don't you? If you're going into fight, you want to win. So, the human body is pretty fragile. That's why those guys have to wear all the equipment that they do, so they protect themselves, Kevlar vest and other things. But one of the things that they're working on is trying to create a super soldier. Now, I don't know that I'm not in the military, I don't know that for sure. But reports is that if they can make them bigger and stronger and faster and taller, that they're going to try. We're talking about the fallen angels again, and these guys did something in the past that they're doing again today. And this is the tie I'm going to make here, because the fallen angels have not stopped what they were doing in the very beginning. Now, some of my colleagues and friends said what they did in the past, they never did again. There was only one incursion. I don't believe that, because in this passages I just showed you in Numbers 13:33, it says, and also after that, these guys came back. Not the same ones. It doesn't say the same ones. It says that there was others that came back, and it listed those races of giants, those Nephilim. So something happened. I believe that there was a second incursion, because it doesn't say all of them committed these things. Some of them did. So we see that the serpent is Nakash, or the shining one. And this goes back to Daniel 2:43. And it says that, now Daniel, you have to understand, he's a Hebrew, but he gets taken away into captivity into Babylon, okay, under King Nebuchadnezzar. And he takes away those guys for 70 years. They're held captive in Babylon. And Daniel has this dream, right, about the statue. But one of the things Daniel says is that he says, whereas thou sawest iron mixed with clay, and he's talking about that statue he saw. We won't get into the statue, but he's saying the iron mixed with clay, this is the toes at the bottom of the statue, they shall not mingle themselves with the seed of men. That's a very interesting statement, actually, that he's saying here. They shall not mingle themselves with the seed of men. Who's they? They shall not mingle themselves. Well, if they is those fallen angels, they shall not mingle themselves with the seed of men. It says they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. Whereas you saw iron mixed with miry clay, but they shall not cleave to one another. In other words, what he's saying is they, whoever they are, and if they are the same they back then in Genesis 6, it's the same they of the fallen angels, they shall mingle themselves again with the seed of men, and they shall not cleave to one another, just like iron does not cleave with clay. He's telling you that something is going to mix with the seed of humanity again, and that will not cleave. That will not be a natural offspring. He's telling you that the return of the Nephilim will come back. This is in prophecy. No marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. We see this throughout history, that we have aliens. We're talking about seed wars, because the seed of the serpent, remember, they shall mix themselves with the seed of men. Something's going on that's corrupting the seed line. We see this in Cush, who begat Nimrod. In the Greek, he's the Gibborim. This is also in the Epic of Gilgamesh. If you don't know that, I would encourage you to go see that, or to go read it. Nimrod is Gilgamesh, is Osiris, is Apollo. These guys are all the same. Names change throughout history. Why? Because we do that. It changes with the cultures. Gilgamesh was Nimrod. Gilgamesh is described as 6 fingers. He's holding a lion. This is a rather poor picture. I apologize, but I wanted you to see that he's holding a lion. It's not a kitty cat. It's a lion. Gilgamesh was a giant with 6 fingers and 6 toes, holding a lion like you would if you picked up your house cat. The Sumerian tablet of Gilgamesh, you see him here sitting on his throne, and you see these guys coming and approaching him. Was he a giant? The evidence is looking like he certainly was. Did you know they found the tomb of Gilgamesh? Archaeologists in Iraq believe that they have found the lost tomb of the king of Gilgamesh, which is an epic written about 2,500 years before the birth of Christ. This goes back a long time. So I'll let you read that on your own. Gilgamesh tomb found, but they're finding things. Remember I told you about the convergence of evidence? Something's happening again that was happening back in Genesis 6. That's why I wanted to lay the foundation for you. Because it says in the prophecies, as the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. For in those days they were, before the flood, they were eating and drinking. Okay, but what were they doing back then? Not eating and drinking, although it says that. It was describing the activities. But what was the central activity? The fallen angels descending on Mount Hermon at the place of anathema, corrupting the bloodlines. See, that prophecy that was given in Daniel that the Nephilim will return, that they shall blend themselves with the seed of man and they shall not mix. Remember I was telling you about the chimeras? These guys are coming back. That's my personal opinion. As an archaeologist, I can't prove it, but I can tell you from ancient writings and history that I believe the Nephilim are coming back. And they're not here to help us. That's my personal opinion. There's something going on behind the scenes. And the tie is this, is that what they were doing back in those days, they're now doing again, but they're doing it a little different this time. How are they doing it? How are they blending themselves with the seed of men again? And not just men, animals. We know it as abduction experiences, etc. But they're taking people against their will for the most part, losing hours or days or even a week of time. Not because they want to go, because they are forced against their will to go. What's going on? Something's happening. They weren't doing it like they did back in those days. They're doing it a little different this time, but they're doing the same thing. Nothing new is under the sun, is it? They're taking the seed of humanity and blending it with whatever, and I think they're creating another race of Nephilim. Can I prove it? Not necessarily, but there's enough evidence that we all know that leads to that, because we know the testimonies of people who say that they've had that happen to them. Something's going on. Transgenics, the return of the Nephilim. What does it all mean for us? If those guys are coming back, what does it mean? I think it means that something's coming down the pike that's not good. That's my opinion. But I don't think these guys are here to help us. I think they're here for an ulterior motive, and it's for them. It's not for us. Now, you may disagree, and that's okay. This is a big footprint that was found in the banks of the Paluxy River near Glen Rose. That's a 24-inch human track. Is it human, or is it Nephilim? That's a cast of that thing. That's huge, isn't it? We're talking about convergence of evidence. This is Alien Agenda, The Return of the Nephilim. This is the book I co-authored with Dr. McDaniel. And the book did well. We wanted to provide something new for you. And I thought it was very important to provide information that maybe you hadn't heard of before. I certainly hadn't heard of it before. And I wanted to converge the evidence for you to bridge the gap and hopefully provide answers that could help explain the UFO phenomenon. And see, I think these guys have been here, and they've been here for a long time. And I don't think they're here to help us. That's my opinion. But what's the alien agenda and the return of the Nephilim? These guys are coming back.